Hey everyone, I'm here with Dorian and Antipa of Big Sky Bassoon. I am here in Great Falls, Montana, getting some work done on my bassoon. Dorian actually just did a bunch of work, replacing pads, making keys less noisy. He can talk more about what he did because I don't even know everything that he did. But I thought for you all that I'd ask him some questions about maintenance and repair, and that I'm sure you're wondering about, and hopefully he can clear up any questions or confusions that way. How often should a bassoon see maintenance, and what type of things do you usually do in a maintenance appointment?
It's ideal to have that done every year if possible. Reality happens. Sometimes you can't always get in every year. Everybody understands that. But once a year is really good, especially if you're playing regularly, if you're every day, if you're a student, if you're a professional, if you're gigging a lot. Once a year is going to really help keep it playing well. And keep it playing quietly, keep the keys quiet. If you're kind of like, I play once a week for fun, once a year is probably not totally necessary. But what you're going to notice is eventually the oils are going to start drying out in the keys, and you're going to start hearing more percussion sounds than maybe bassoon sounds. And at that point, it's a really good indicator that you want to get in, get it looked at, and have a technician really take it apart and clean it and re-oil it, as opposed to just adding the oil yourself. It is important to have it cleaned so that we get all the grit and the dust and the things that are going to cause damage to those mechanisms out before we add new oil.
What is the benefit of seeing a bassoon specialist like you as opposed to seeing a general woodwind repair specialist that might be someone local to you? There's people like you, but you're spread out throughout the world, and it's sometimes hard to get to places like Great Falls, Montana. So why should someone see someone like you?
As in any industry, right, you want to find somebody who has a good reputation, which is really what it comes down to, no matter who you see. So if you have colleagues or friends who've had a good experience, that's worth a lot. To know that you're going to get good care for your instrument. For any instrument out there, there are people who specialize in that instrument. So there's going to be a clarinet specialist, a flute specialist, a sax specialist, and a bassoon specialist. And what those people can really offer is the knowledge about how the instrument is supposed to sound and feel. So a specialist on an instrument hopefully is proficient or better than proficient at playing that instrument. And so, speaking for myself, I've played professionally for many years before I transitioned to being more full-time into repair. So, I know how the instrument should feel under my fingers. I know how it should sound. I can pick up on minute changes in timbre as well as pitch. There are plenty of very good, very accomplished and reputable, I guess I would call them more general technicians, who can do a good job with the bassoon and are certainly good resources to have for some cleaning, even for an emergency or for a regular pad replacement. A lot of people can do a really good job. Again, I would go back to that, who's got a reputation, because as with any instrument, bad work can cause damage, and I've seen instruments that have been damaged by somebody who probably thought they were doing a good thing, and it actually was not a good thing. So I'd say, what are you going to get from a bassoon specialist? You're going to get a more bassoon specific touch. The instrument's, it's going to be set up to be played by a bassoonist for a bassoonist.
So what are some signs that your bassoon might need maintenance and you need to schedule an appointment to see somebody?
Right. It's a great question. And the answer is, if your bassoon stops sounding like a beautiful sounding bassoon and sounds more like a percussion instrument. This is my instrument. I repair bassoons for a living. It's time for me to bring it in. I'm actually working on the piece right now for a concert in October and a solo thing, and just thinking to myself, boy, when's the last time this got looked at? And this is the first clue that it's time to get looked at. So if you're hearing a lot of key noise, that's a sign that probably the oil and the grease has started to dry out, has started to kind of migrate away and get dirty. That's your first indication that it needs to be oiled. And I would recommend, rather than just going in and dropping some oil in yourself, that you really go have it looked at, because the amount of time that it's taken for that oil to dissipate and create loud noises is an indication that it's just time to be seen again. And good chances are that there are going to be some pads that are starting to leak, and some other things that might need to be looked at. Your corks are going to get compressed, felts are going to get compressed. All of these things work together to kind of just slowly degrade the playing experience. So listen for clicky keys, and it means it's time to go in. Also, in conjunction with that, if you're starting to really struggle with the low notes, especially, right? Bassoonists, we're always struggling to get those low notes to speak, especially really soft, quiet second bassoon excerpts, right? They'd love to torture us with those. If they're getting harder and you're thinking, is it just me? Is it just me? What's wrong with my reeds? Blah, blah, blah. If that's a common mantra for you, but more importantly, if you're increasingly saying that to yourself, that's a good sign that you've got some leaking going on down in the boot and bass joint.
What's the difference between a basic maintenance visit and, like, say, a full overhaul of a bassoon?
Yeah, good. Lots of tricky questions with really not simple answers. So a full overhaul, to me, like a full overhaul, not a restoration, but an overhaul would be instrument gets completely stripped down of the keys. All the mechanisms are taken apart. Every moving part is disassembled that can be. All the metal parts are cleaned, washed, descaled. Sometimes the metal can build up a mineral deposit on them. It gets completely cleaned off. The metal's going to get polished or buffed, depending on what the plating is on the keys. All new pads, all new corks, all new felts, leathers, everything is going to be replaced. Probably your tenon corks are all going to be replaced or restrung. The bassoon itself, the body of the instrument, is going to get an oil bath to kind of restore those oils that have probably leached out and kind of dissipated over time. And then it's going to get put together, regulated, all the pads are going to get leveled, play tested, all that good stuff. In there also, one thing I didn't mention was part of that's going to be the U-tube is going to get removed. We're going to look inside the bore, make sure that there isn't any rot starting. We get rot on the unlined side of the boot bore. And that needs to be addressed. And there are some really effective and simple ways to address that if it doesn't progress too much. Once it gets to be, a real rot issue, not just kind of, moisture damage. Once rot sets in, things can get invasive and expensive. We can still fix it, but you don't ever want to have to get to that point. So another reason to bring your instrument in regularly is to keep a look on that. So that's for a full overhaul. Anything less than that, it just kind of depends on how often the instrument is seen. I guess on the other end of the spectrum would be, say your instrument isn't all that old or the pads are fairly new and you're really good at getting your instrument brought in once a year. In that case, we're just going to remove all the keys. We're still going to remove all the mechanisms. Everything that moves is going to get taken off and cleaned. All the oil is going to get cleaned off. We're going to lightly polish if we need to, some of the silver, grease and oil, put back together, level pads that need to be leveled, replace pads that need to be leveled, replace corks and felts that need to be replaced. Those compress over time, so they get replaced more often than pads do, but they don't need to be replaced every year. We will still look under the boot U-tube and make sure that that's clean and clear and all in good shape. And so, the difference in those services can range from being on the low end, maybe 6 hours of work, and on the high end, over 20 hours of work. That should give you an idea if you think, wow, I've had this instrument for 7 years and I haven't had it looked at, it might need a little bit of work. Might take a few hours. Or
he's pointing at me.
I didn't point. You can self-identify if you choose. I take great care of my instrument. I get it seen every year. Then you're going to know, we're going to maybe replace a pad or two and we'll be in and out in a day and not too bad. All right, so here's a little tour of some of the shop that you've just seen in this video. Over here is where I do the bulk of my work. I've got a bunch of pads, clarinet pads, flute pads, some older bass clarinet pads that I've inherited, saxophone pads, brass work stuff in case I ever have to do that. Sometimes I need to, so there's some brass springs and felts and things. swabs, springs, all of my kind of supplies that I might need to put on instruments are over there. Bassoon pads are over on this side. Hand tools are in this rack over here. So we've got all kinds of different pliers for key fitting, swedging keys, removing springs, adjusting things as needed, scrapers, screwdrivers, all of this kind of stuff. The lubricants, oil, alcohol for cleaning. You saw a lot of this little tool. This is one of the things that I have in my hand the most, aside from a screwdriver. This is my feeler gauge, and this is what I use to close the pad on this to see if it's sealing well. And so that is a piece of shim stock that is a 1/2 of an inch thick. And that's what I use to test if the pad is closing all the way. I use that in conjunction where I can with a leak light. And that's this little tool that I put together. Put that inside the bore and kind of can look for where the pad's not closing all the way. Unfortunately with a bassoon, because of the way it's shaped and the way some of the tone holes are and the angle of the hole from the pad to the body, that leak light doesn't work on a lot of the pads. But on the big pads, on the bass joint, the long joint, it does work really well for that. So I like to use every tool that I possibly can to give me the best information that I can get to make the instrument playing as close to perfectly as possible. Fun little tool that I made over here that Natalie was asking about earlier is MagnaHelic, which is a pressure tester. And this is a tool that I put together out of a bunch of parts purchased from eBay and industrial suppliers in the hardware store and the pet store. So there's a fish tank pump in there connected through this poly tubing to the MagnaHelic gauge itself, a flow meter, flow regulator, pressure regulator, and then all of that comes through to this. And when it's calibrated, you see there's no pressure, so it's reading 6. And then if I plug the hole, we're going to drop down pretty close to 0. And so that's just one more check that I can use on instruments to see just how well they're sealing. Smaller instruments seal well, really well and better. You know, oboes, you really want to get that down to a 0. I saw a video somebody else posted about a saxophone and using a MagnaHelic on a saxophone, and they're so leaky, they said basically, well, if the needle moves at all, it's probably good. I go for better than pretty good. You know, depending on the joint of the bassoon, you're going to have some inherent leaking, so you're not always going to get to 0, but at least that helps give me just one. You know, I've got 1, 2, 3 checks to make sure that everything's sealing correctly before I give it a play test and make sure that it feels right. Got my bench motor here. It's just a blower motor, like a fan motor, hooked up to a foot pedal so that I can control that hands-free. And I use that. I spin metal rods in there, the hinge rods that hold your keys. I spin that, and then I clean them off with some polishing cloth to get the kind of the tarnish or if any rust has set in on steel rods, I get that cleaned up before I put them back together. A lot of other tool uses for this. Sometimes I just use it to hold things that I'm working on or whatever, but that gets used fairly frequently. Of course, I got my torches for your pads for heating up the glue. I use a couple of different kinds of glue, depends. Okay, so here's another part of the shop out in the garage where I do some of the more involved and machining work. So this is an Atlas lathe. I forget the year, but I picked this up actually at an estate sale in town, and it barely worked, and I took the thing completely apart. I took every bolt off it, rebuilt the whole thing, and it works great, and I get to do a lot of cool stuff with this. I get to make tools with this. I can do tenon replacements on this. I can bore out boot rot and do a boot sleeve with this, and I can machine the insert for the boot to match the taper of the bore, the original bore, so everything's as original as possible. One of the kind of simpler things that I can do with this, I made this tapered rod, which is tapered to match the taper of a bassoon. So I've got my parts piece here, and that fits in there. I guess I can take this and putting the joint on the dowel, put that in the chuck, secured in place, and that down. And so now I can spin this, and if it's a joint that we're doing traditional string wrapping on, I've got it set to a really low gear, and I can just spin the instrument really slowly, and then I can stand here with my red string and feed it on and get a nice even wrap that way. So that's just one of the things I can do. This is a junker bassoon that was missing part of the body and keys and stuff. So I actually used it for when I was kind of figuring out and developing my methods for doing a tenon replacement. So you can see, maybe if you can see inside there, but the tenon's gone, and then there's a recess that's been carved out. And then that's to receive the new tenon graft. So the tenon had been broken off. So there are pictures of that also on my website if you're interested. So that's one of the tools that I get to do a lot with and make parts with, make other tools with, make pieces with. And then the other big tool for that kind of work would be the mill. I've got it set up right now in the middle of a project, just making some T-nuts to hold it. But it also operates as a drill press. So if we're adding a key, say you're adding a high E key to your wing joint, that would be done on this. I don't hold the joint in the machine chuck. Obviously, I've got another tool that I built. So your wing joint gets held between the cones, and then that gets held on the table there. So I would hold that, and then I would put in the correct size, drill, and we'd drill the wing joint, the IE tone hole, drill the new post hole, get all that situated, and that would all be done on this machine. So I can use it as a milling machine and as a drill press. Also tone hole replacements. If the top of your tone hole is damaged, say it somehow got chipped, or if there's been moisture damage and we've got some rot issues in there, then we can drill out part of the tone hole and put a sleeve in, much the same way you would put a tenon sleeve in, or a boot sleeve for the rotten boot.
If someone is interested in having you look at their bassoon, how would they schedule an appointment with you?
So I have a website, bigskybassoon.com. Emails on there, phone numbers on there. You can get in touch with me either way. You can text me, but I'd really prefer you to email me or call me. I do keep track of emails better. I do get back to those within a day or two usually, unless I'm out hiking or backpacking or something. So email or call, we can talk about it, and we can get you on the schedule. And I can give you kind of an idea of what it seems like you might need based on just having a quick conversation about the current condition of your instrument, how often it's been seen and all that. And then once your instrument gets to me, then I'll take it apart and get a good look at it, and then I'll get back in touch with you with a more kind of in-depth appraisal of what it might need and what it might cost, and give you kind of an estimate for what that costs, knowing that every time we start working, things come up that we didn't see before, or something else needs to be adjusted, and so that can happen. But we can get pretty close on it.
I know that the price of work on an instrument is totally dependent on the specific bassoon and the condition it's in and how much maintenance it's seen. But can you just give us a ballpark of what you'd be looking at in a visit? Whether it's like some general maintenance things or a full overhaul, just so we kind of know, for those of us who haven't been to someone like you before, what to kind of expect, financially.
So yeah, if you just have kind of no idea what it might cost, it can range from, let's say, roughly mid-hundreds to, if you've got problems, we can go over 1,000 pretty easily. But that's talking like if we're doing some body work, if we're needing to address some moisture damage or tone holes need to be resealed, and we're in the more of the overhaul range. So if you don't have big problems, we're going to be in the hundreds.
Can you talk about the process of shipping a bassoon to you? I know that you can be like me and come in person to Great Falls, make a vacation out of it, schedule a trip, or you can ship a bassoon. So can you talk about that process of how do you make sure that the bassoon gets here safely? What service do you use? Do you insure it? What goes into that process?
Yeah, that is good, because a lot of people, and rightly so, are nervous about shipping their instrument. I've shipped mine. I play a 6,000 Heckle. I've shipped it before I started doing repairs, so it's doable. It's a little nerve-wracking, but Knock on wood, I have not had a bad experience and have not even really heard of a bad experience. That said, you need to really be careful and take precautions. By the time this video is posted, there's going to be on my website detailed instructions for shipping. I use UPS. I recommend people use UPS. Let's just all agree we're going to use UPS. They take good care of the instrument, of the case, of the package. But probably the most important thing is going to be for you to pack it carefully in that case and to pack the case carefully in the box. So the instructions are going to really walk you through how to wrap each individual joint of the bassoon so that it cannot move inside the case. And then you're going to wrap that bassoon case or package it in bubble wrap or foam, soft foam padding. No styrofoam peanuts, please, but bubble wrap or a foam padding. And you're going to put that in a box so that it can't move around in the box at all. And so you kind of think about, and I wrote this in my instructions, you kind of think about like your instrument is kind of like the brain inside of your skull, where a lot of damage can happen from an impact. If you know, your brain slams against the inside of your skull, that's how you get a concussion. Same thing with a bassoon, right? If that box got dropped, is the case inside the box going to slam into the bottom of the box, and then is the bassoon inside the case going to slam down inside the case? That's going to cause your damage. So really comes down to packing your instrument carefully. Ship it UPS and ship it with signature required. And then of course, you know, you can come in person as Natalie did today. A lot of times I'm going to want more than one day on an instrument, especially if it isn't just a real quick fix. So if you're nearby and you want to swing by, we can set up a time to do something. One really great option if you need more extensive work would be to ship it ahead of time and then plan to come out and pick it up in person. Couple benefits of that is it gives me a little bit more wiggle room to look at your instrument and really assess what's needed and take care of that without, you know, being under the pressure of you needing to leave, you know, by a certain time. And also then if you come out and you're here in person, then not only am I going to play test it and run it through all my diagnostics, but then you get to test it and say, yeah, that's exactly what I want. Or, hey, this plays great, but actually now that it plays so great, you know, this key feels a little high. Is there a way we can adjust that? Or now that it's playing really well and everything's sealing, you know, this note has always been a little sharp or a little flat. Is there something we can do with that? So we can do that final voicing with you here. Or we can do key adjustments. Sometimes we can just adjust the height of a key just for your ergonomics or ease of use. So if you make money playing your instrument and you have pay taxes on that, you know, instrument services and that maintenance should be a tax write-off. I'm not a tax person, talk to your tax person, but should be a write-off. So what I'm saying is Montana's a beautiful place to visit.
One special gift for you just for watching this video today. So the first 10 people that contact Dorian through his email or phone number will get free return shipping. So if you ship your bassoon to Dorian, you don't have to pay for the shipping on the way back. So contact him now, especially if you're on the fence about maybe I need some bassoon maintenance, and you probably do. So just contact him, you'll get some free return shipping.
Dennis, speak.
Good boy.